Hi, I'm Corey Antifero, a biosafety consultant for UTMB Health, sponsor of Space Center Houston's Thought Leaders Lecture Series. Tonight, we have the unique opportunity to learn about spacesuits from the experts at NASA. Some of you watching might be surprised to learn that research labs at UTMB's Galveston National Laboratory, where our scientists and research team members also wear spacesuits. Of course, our suits differ from NASA's, and we have several types. A critical part of my job in biosafety is to train our scientific staff to navigate in relatively small spaces in the lab and perform research while wearing spacesuits attached to a hose that supplies their oxygen. Our spacesuits are an added layer of protection that make it possible to safely study extremely dangerous infectious diseases and develop new diagnostics, vaccines, and treatments. Just as our NASA colleagues spend hours training and working with specialized equipment to prepare for the important work in space, we do the same to ensure our safety in our laboratory. UTMB salutes the professionals at NASA who make certain that our amazing astronauts are dressed for success. Thank you for joining us. We hope you enjoyed tonight's lecture.
Hello. I'm Daniel Newmeyer, Vice President of Education for Space Center Houston. We provide the public with dynamic science and space exploration learning experiences. We also serve as the official visitor center for NASA Johnson Space Center. Our exhibits and programs share the story of human space exploration, past, present, and future, with more than 1.2 million visitors annually from around the world, through on-site and virtual experiences. So we want to thank you for joining Space Center Houston's Thought Leaders Series, presented by University of Texas Medical Branch. This month's presentation features spacesuits. Our series features space and science experts from across the country who provide insights and perspectives on space exploration. Through our Thought Leaders Series and other programming, Space Center Houston makes science and learning about space exploration accessible to everyone. And now on to our June Thought Leaders Series, Spacesuits, presented by UTMB. Our panel includes the artist astronaut Nicole Stott, ILC Dover fellow David Graziosi, and Amy Ross, NASA Johnson Space Center spacesuit engineer. Nicole Stott is a senior technical advisor for ILC Dover Aerospace and a veteran of 2 spaceflights. She logged 104 days living and working in space as a crew member on both the International Space Station and the Space Shuttle. Stott was just the 10th woman to perform a spacewalk. David Graziosi is a fellow at the ILC Dover operation. He has 30 years of experience in the development of spacesuits and spacesuit components. Graziosi holds 3 U.S. patents that include spacesuit technology and inflatable wing structures. Amy Ross is a spacesuit engineer in the Crew and Thermal Systems Division at NASA Johnson Space Center. She joined NASA in 1996. Her current role is in a rotation as the Assistant Chief Engineer for the International Space Station program. She has experience working on the Exploration Extravehicular Mobility Unit, pressure garment system, specifically focusing on design, fabrication, qualification, testing, and flight hardware delivery. So we want to start with Amy. Amy, tell us about this exciting work that you're doing right now with spacesuits.
Yeah, I think it's interesting to talk about not only what we do, but why we do it. So I think one of the places I want to start is, why do you build a spacesuit? Why do you need a spacesuit? I always think about that with 2 thoughts. The first is, where you're going and what are you doing? So think about like a vacation plan. It matters where you're going and what you're doing, because if you're gonna pack very differently if you're gonna go to the beach, or you're gonna pack very differently if you're gonna go skiing, for example. And so those 2 things are very important. So let's talk about how we think about that for a spacesuit. So where are we going? This is where astronauts go. International Space Station in low Earth orbit, about 250 miles away from Earth. The moon, about 240,000 miles away from Earth. And then Mars, which is a big jump, is about 220 million miles away from Earth. So we have to know what these environments are like and make sure that our spacesuit protects our astronauts while they're working in these environments. So what are our hazards when you go outside of your space vehicle and do a spacewalk? Well, try the top one is the vacuum. In most of these environments, you're in a vacuum or a very low atmospheric pressure. Then extreme temperatures, both cold and hot. Radiation is something we work on and think about that. Humans can be exposed to radiation, but you got to be careful how and how much. And then micrometeoroids, orbital debris is included in there. So we'll talk about why those are scary because they're little. So why are we concerned? Okay, so let's talk about a vacuum. So what is a vacuum? A vacuum scientifically means a lack of air to breathe, but really a lack of matter. Okay, now why is that a problem for the human body? Well, we need oxygen and pressure. Okay, so if you're in a place where there is no oxygen or pressure, then there's a problem. You need oxygen to stay alive, to think, and so you lose useful consciousness within seconds if you don't have oxygen to breathe, and you're dead within minutes. Okay, and then your lungs, because your lungs can't function without that pressure and that oxygen available. Another aspect of that is that the boiling temperature is directly related, of water is directly related to the pressure in the atmosphere. And so just like when you have your box of brownies and it has for baking in Colorado, there's a different kind of regime you go through because of the lower atmospheric pressure at that altitude. The human body basically will boil water at that in a vacuum just because of its temperature. And so what temperature is our body? 98.6 degrees Fahrenheit. What temperature will water boil at? 98 degrees Fahrenheit. And then the way we get around that is in a spacesuit, you have a layer of the suit. It's a soft good. It's called the bladder of the suit. It's a plastic coated fabric. And that plastic coating is what helps to keep, or polymer coating, helps to keep the gas, the oxygen inside the spacesuit, as well as a little bubble of air that pushes on you like you need that air to be pushing on you to survive. Okay, now let's talk about those extreme temperatures. What kind of temperatures are we talking about? Well, I like to bake again. And so when you're setting an oven to bake cookies, it's normally about 350 degrees Fahrenheit. Well, when you're talking about lunar noon at the equator, we're talking about 240 degrees Fahrenheit. So close to cookie baking temperatures. But on the other side of that, we're talking cold. And right now the moon is kind of like the limiting case here. So when I put 378 degrees Fahrenheit on there, that is because that is in a permanently shadowed region that they want us to go and do some science. And in those regions, it's basically liquid helium kinds of temperatures. That's that cold. So how do we deal with this? Well, in space, there are two, not the normal three different ways, and you could talk about why. You can't use the other one, but conduction and radiation. Okay. So conduction is two objects touching and they transfer the heat by touching. And then the other is radiation. Okay, so think about the sun hitting you on a hot day. So how do we design the suit to get around that? So what we do is we use a multi-layer of insulation system that helps to limit the conduction by both conduction and radiation. So the materials and the multi-layer insulation are basic, which is basically like a thin aluminum foil. It's reflective, so it shines like aluminum foil. And so when the radiation from the sun comes, the thermal radiation from the sun comes and hits that aluminized mylar, it bounces back away. So that's one way we can kind of keep that radiation thermal energy from coming in, radiated thermal energy. And then for conduction, those little layers of multi-layer insulation are separated. There's a little gap, and so there is no conduction, so that heat transfer can't move that way. So that allows us to basically isolate the human inside the suit from the external environment to keep them protected, and that's the little internal environment. But then we created another problem. So how do we deal with that? Because now you're trapped inside this little volume of space, right? Inside your little people-shaped balloon of the spacesuit. Well, we need to move heat away from you because you have 98.6 degrees Fahrenheit coming off of you most of the time. And so we have something called the liquid cooling and ventilation garment, so nicely modeled here by Mr. Phil West. And that garment has a lot of tubes woven or sewn into it that carry cold water from your portable life support system, your backpack, that comes through those tubes, picks up that body heat, and then is circulated back out to be cooled and recirculated. And so that's how we move that thermal energy from inside the suit out and away from the humans so they don't get too hot and they can do their work, as well as doing some other things as far as the ventilation, keeping some of the air fresh and not letting things get too stagnant or humid inside the suit. And when we talk about radiation, when we're talking about the International Space Station, we're still within the Van Allen radiation belts. So that helps us a lot because that means the radiation that we're experiencing primarily is ultraviolet radiation. So the same thing that gives you a sunburn on the beach is what we're trying to protect our astronauts against. And so we've got some good methods of doing that. Primarily, the astronaut is covered by the spacesuit. So your skin, your largest organ, is protected from that. And then your eyes are then sensitive. And so the materials and coatings that we have on the helmet protect you from that radiation, the ultraviolet radiation, to your eyes. Now, when you go out beyond low Earth orbit and beyond the Van Allen radiation belts, there are different kinds of radiation that can be a problem for humans. And really, the spacesuit doesn't protect you much from that. So we use a principle called as low as reasonably achievable, the LARA principle. And so we just track how much radiation dosage the astronauts receive during an EVA, as well extravehicular activity, spacewalking, as well as through the duration of the rest of their mission. And we keep track of that so that we can compare that against our limits for an astronaut's career radiation dose. And then, so I said we talk about that micrometeoroid, that little bitty thing. Why are we scared about it? Well, why are we scared about it? How little bitty is it? So this is actually a big micrometeoroid because the way we test, we simulate the energy of the impact, not the velocity of the impact. So to get that 1/2 kinetic energy is equal 1/2 mass times velocity squared, you need to have a bigger mass because we don't have as big of a velocity with our light gas guns, which is how we test. But in space, we have orbital velocities, which is 17,000, 17,500 miles per hour. So we have little bitty, like ballpoint pen ball kinds of size of micrometeoroids. But because of this equation, kinetic energy is equal to 1/2 mass times velocity squared. That velocity matters a lot, and so there's a lot of energy there. So we do the same thing that the space station does. We have that same multiple layers of insulation, the MLI, that are laid up, and that is the bumper shield of the station around our spacesuit. And so because it's a hypervelocity impact, the physics make it true that just those thin layers of aluminum foil can absorb that energy, dissipate that energy, spread it out, and protect our astronaut, which is pretty cool. So when you're outside the space station, what kinds of things do you do? Well, we assembled the space station using EVAs, and now we're maintaining the space station using EVAs. In fact, we did an EVA to install new solar arrays, and we will do another EVA to do solar array installation too, as we try to grow station, allow more vehicles to visit it, and have power for those vehicles and habitats to do their work. And then what does it look like when you go to a planetary surface? Well, the main job you're going to be doing there is geology. And so here's on the left, astronauts doing a sample collection. Then in the middle, they're setting up a science experiment. And then on the right, they are looking for signs of life, and they're testing for that. So those are the kinds of things that astronauts need to be able to do and move in a spacesuit when you go out and do a spacewalk. So that's the why we need to have a spacesuit.
Thank you so much, Amy. That's fascinating to hear the why we need the spacesuits and then to understand how complex these little mini spacecraft are and the importance of, you know, this true incredible advances in technology to make these spacesuits safe for our astronauts. And I'm now excited to introduce David to tell us more about the evolution of the spacesuit and how this amazing piece of technology has developed over time. David, could you tell us more about the evolution of spacesuits?
Sure, I'd be glad to. I'm going to start talking about the different suits, the evolution of US EVA spacesuits. It's by no means a complete list, but it's pretty comprehensive and sort of walks from the beginning of our first EVAs in space, extravehicular activity or spacewalks, and goes through both the operational program suits, like the Apollo suits and the shuttle suits, as well as intermixing the advanced suit work. And Amy's already shown you some of those pictures. So if we sort of start at the beginning of EVA spacesuits, it's the Gemini program back in the early 1960s to middle 1960s. And those suits were unique in that they were really started life as a launch entry suit or an intravehicular spacesuit, so primarily keeping the two astronauts safe inside the capsule. But as that program progressed, it was decided to try to do the first EVAs, go outside, figure out what it would be like to go do a spacewalk. What do we need to maintenance those vehicles in flight or fix something that might have went wrong? And so you can see that first picture of an astronaut there outside on an umbilical, and that's one of the unique things. It didn't have that portable life support system. It used an umbilical to provide the life support. They also came up with some interesting systems for maneuvering around out in space, free floating in space. But again, those suits were primarily used for intravehicular activity, but then were adapted to work outside the spacecraft. If you jump to the next lineage of suits, you've got the Apollo suits, and there really is two main versions: the A7L, which were the first suits to go to the moon. The B suit, as we call it, the later version, was designed primarily to with some more mobility, so that you could sit in the lunar rover and drive around on the surface of the moon. And now those suits as well were sort of a dual function suit, so they had to not only provide launch entry, intravehicular activity use, but then also go down to the surface and do walking EVAs on a planetary body. So they were sort of a jack of all trades kind of suit. So they just had to do a lot of different things. These first two suits, the Gemini suit and the Apollo suits, especially because they had to have that role for intravehicular activity, they needed to be primarily all soft, very comfortable, strapped into a seat, taking those launch and reentry loads. And again, so very capable suits, but definitely a compromise because they had to fill multiple roles. If you move on to the next suit, I included the Litton RX series of spacesuits. So they made many different versions of these spacesuits. If you're going to go to the Smithsonian, you could see some of those in person. And this was really the first entry into what we call hard suit arena. So you can see from the picture there, it's a lot of hard structures, everything from the shoulders to the waist to we call the brief and the hip areas, and really even down to the legs and the boots. So those were designed to be higher operating pressure suits, really a dedicated surface EVA suit, thought to be, more robust, very highly mobile, but again, with one purpose in mind, and that was doing planetary surface EVAs. Now I'll sort of jump ahead. I've got an arrow there drawn to the NASA ZPS suit. So that's zero pre-breathe suit. And again, I mentioned the higher operating pressure. So in the early 1980s, sort of in parallel with the shuttle space program, basically going to low Earth orbit in the shuttle spacecraft, NASA was working on developing higher operating pressure suits. And the primary reason there is in order to operate in a vacuum, the suit needs to be pressurized to an adequate pressure for life support. And in the shuttle EMU and even the Apollo suit, you're in the around 4 psi range of pressure. At that pressure, if you can imagine, here on Earth, we're at 14.7 psi. Making that reduction in pressure from 14.7 down to 4.3, what happens there is basically the nitrogen in your bloodstream wants to basically boil off, come out of solution, and you can get what's called the bends, something that scuba divers can obviously experience as well. In order to minimize that, you have to pre-breathe pure oxygen in order to purge your system of that nitrogen. And that can be a lengthy process. So on something like the Apollo suits, the EMU suits that are around the 4 psi range, that can be easily a 4-hour type of event. And in some cases with other logistical issues, that's even longer. Now, what NASA had found is through a lot of testing is if you could just double that pressure to be around 8 psi, you could basically be zero pre-breathe. And that is really based on a very minor risk of the bend. So if you could operate a suit at 8.3, you could get in and go. And again, you can imagine if you're on the lunar surface wanting to get out of your vehicle, go do science, go do exploration, you really want to have as quick a turnaround as possible for that. So again, the ZPS program sort of built on the Litton RX series of suit technologies, as well as some other things. And you can see the picture there from 1985 of that suit. Now, that architecture was somewhat constrained as well. It utilized some of the components from the Shuttle EMU spacesuit, so it wasn't a clean sheet design, as it were, but it was sort of the first foray into what would a true 8.3 or 8 psi suit look like. So if I now take a step back, the Shuttle EMU, which really had its origins in the mid 1970s and ultimately became operational right around 1980. Again, a big departure from the Apollo spacesuit in that it was an extravehicular, low Earth orbit or zero gravity spacesuit. So one purpose in mind. And the other thing, its purpose primarily was satellite servicing, doing maintenance, and ultimately we'll talk a little bit about, building the space station. And again, so very single-minded spacesuit design. It actually has a mixture of hard structures. The upper torso is actually a composite hard structure. Most of the rest of the suit is soft goods though, so it is sort of a compromise in comparison to some of the previous generations of suit. Now, if you take the leap from the mid 1980s on the ZPS suit, all the lessons that were learned from operating the shuttle spacesuit for about 5 years and the work in the advanced world being done on that ZPS suit, and obviously all of the history prior to that, sort of culminated in really down selecting to an architecture in the Mark III and sometimes even called the hybrid suit, right? So it uses a lot of hard structures, but it still has soft goods structures in it as well. And so that is a very highly mobile suit that really has the ability to not only do zero-G EVAs, that would be something like going from the space station to Space Shuttle, but also an extremely highly mobile walking suit for obviously many different gravity fields, anything from the 1/6 on the moon to 3/8 on Mars. And as you'll see in some of the pictures I have and that Amy's already shown, things like remote field testing, and I've got some pictures on this page. So that was the first version of the Mark III suit. So the other big difference there is it is a rear entry system. So you can see on the upper torso, that back panel is hinged and opens up sort of like a refrigerator door. And so you get in from the back where the Shuttle EMU spacesuit that's right next to it, you enter from the waist. So you've got a pair of pants and you've got a shirt with arms in a sense, and you put your pants on and then you come up through the waist opening into the upper part of the suit. With the rear entry architecture, it basically can stay complete. You open the door, you jump in, close the door behind you. So big change in suit architecture there. It also utilizes a lot more rotary bearings. So you've got 2 in the shoulder, 1 in the wrist, which is fairly common. That's similar to EMU. But it utilized a 3-bearing hip structure to provide really good walking mobility, kneeling, sitting, those kind of things. So again, that was sort of the benchmark, and in some cases architecturally still is today for EVA spacesuits. If we move on to the ISS EMU, the reason I'm showing this, it sort of looks like the original EMU, the Shuttle EMU, but really what NASA did is in preparing for building the space station, there was almost a complete helmet to boots redesign of that suit, making it stronger, making it last longer, removing critical failure modes in the suit. These are things that if one thing broke, you'd have a really bad day. So even though from the outside, if you put those 2 pictures next to one another, you'd say the early version from 1980 and the new 1992 version look the same. It's what is underneath that thermal micrometeor garment that Amy's already talked about where the actual working part of the suit, the structural components, changed dramatically. The metal materials, the soft goods materials, there's a lot of, especially for that time, state-of-the-art materials and manufacturing processes as well. So again, most people don't realize that, but a lot of things changed with that International Space Station version of the suit. If we move on, again, you sort of have to look at it almost as a dual timeline. You've got the flight program, flying the space shuttle, surfacing satellites, and doing other things with the EMUs. And then in the advanced suit world, we're working on technologies that are further advanced, the thing that would get us back to the moon or on to Mars. And so even though the original Mark III was really good, enhancements on that continued. So again, you can see here in roughly 1995, an upgraded version of that was made that changed a lot of the metallic structures to composite materials for weight reduction, and adding a waist bearing for even more mobility. And then later, actually ankle bearings. So again, continual enhancements through design and test and understanding, what's really needed to get us beyond low Earth orbit in the next generation suit. And then some other advanced suits that sort of were part of that development for comparative, so you can understand what technologies really have the best compromise of mass and cost and strength and all those kind of things, and durability. So the waist entry eye suit, which came online in 1998, there's again a picture out in Arizona during remote field testing of that suit. So it uses a lot of bearings, but all soft structures, except for up there on the helmet, you can see that white portion at the base of the helmet is a composite material that allows you to have an interface to a structural interface to the portable life support system that you see hanging on the back of the suit. And so then that evolved. That was sort of another look at waist entry as an alternative to the rear entry. And then moving on, then the rear entry eye suit was made next. And again, taken back out to those same kind of remote field exercises and basically put through its paces. And then the comparison could be done on really everything from the component level, individual joints and bearings and helmets, to the overall system and what functions the best and really what is the sort of best compromise all the way around. One thing I like to show is, again, there's probably some great ones with the Mark III as well, but that rear entry eye suit, that is out in Meteor Crater, Arizona, at the back side of the rim, almost at the peak. So a lot of folks don't really have an appreciation when they see the EMU free floating and working on the space station, obviously very capable, but not a walking suit, right? So this shows you in a 1G environment, a suit with a person in it and a full-size backpack doing real work in very rough terrain. Lest you think that the current suit technologies are not very capable, just look at this picture. It's not photoshopped. So then all of those advanced technologies, I'll sort of say everything you see on this page is really the lineage of suits trying to get us back to the moon and on to Mars. And so the first suit there being the Z1 suit, again, very similar to the rear entry eye suit shown in the previous page, mostly soft structures, rear entry, a 2-bearing hip system. It actually had a 3-bearing shoulder. Again, what really is the best package here? Is it a 2-bearing? Is it a 3-bearing? Is it soft structures? Is it hard structures? What's the best overall package? The unique thing here is where rear entry eye suit was really a 4.3 psi suit. It took that technology and boosted it to a true 8.30 pre-breathe suit. And then the other big addition to this suit at the time was a requirement to interface to a vehicle or to a habitat where the suit acts as the airlock, so called suit port. So you could basically back up, lock into your habitat or your vehicle, and then instead of having to build and have the extra mass and consumables of a classical airlock, the suit becomes the airlock. Again, something that was explored with that generation of suit. Then moving on, the PXS suit, very similar actually to Z1, but more of a focus on low Earth orbit and zero gravity. But other technology, if you'd remove that fancy cover layer, a lot of new technologies underneath that in the way of the shoulders the upper torso, making it easily sizable to fit a broad range of people. But again, the PXS version was really focused on zero-G space station kind of work. And then you get to Z2, so obviously the follow-on to Z1. And this was the culmination of a lot of this work and coming up with an architecture that is still evolving as you go forward across there into XEMU. Again, it uses a lot of composite structures, definitely some of the most state-of-the-art carbon and fiberglass composite combinations to keep the weight down and make it very robust. And then moving on from there, the rear entry Astro and waist entry Astro sort of group them together because it's a modular system. Basically, if you want to save some mass and still fit a broad population, the waist entry upper torso allows you to do that. But if you have an interface, something like Suitport, or there's a need for the rear entry configuration, that's what you see in the picture there. So again, it uses a combination of soft goods and hard goods. It uses a lot of rotary bearings, and the upper torso in this case is what's called hybrid. So it uses sort of an exoskeleton over soft goods as opposed to a completely contained fiberglass or aluminum upper torso. So a little bit of uniqueness there. And then finally, again, a lot of folks have seen XEMU, and again, sort of evolved out of the Z series of suits. And what NASA is currently working on to be that suit that goes on to the moon and on to Mars.
Well, thank you, David. I mean, it's amazing to see how spacesuits have evolved throughout time and how they're being designed for not just a single use, but different uses in different areas that they can apply. And that leads to our next speaker, who is, the only member of our panels here who has been in a suit and been out, flown around in these suits and used them. So I'm very excited to hear, your experience with that, Nicole, and how this technology is advanced, and then how we, inspire the world with, this exciting work that you get to do.
Well, thanks. It's really nice to be here, and I'm especially happy to be here with Amy and Dave. You couldn't find any two better people in the spacesuit world to share not just the history, but the future of what's going on with spacesuits. They are that, and I am very thankful that they are those people, having been somebody who had the opportunity to go out in one of these suits. There's a lot of stuff we could talk about today with respect to astronauts and working in spacesuits, doing spacewalks. I'll focus on just a couple, but I wanted to start with this picture. This is a picture from a recent EVA. The astronaut in the picture is, although you can't see the whole of him, is Shane Kimbrough. This is his gloved hand at the start of the spacewalk, and it was a spacewalk on the ISS that was working to install a new set of solar array panels, which you can see a little glimpse of some solar array panels in this view. Shane is still at the airlock, and those solar array panels are way out on one of the ends of the space station. So he and his partner Tama had a ways to go out to do their work. But in general, I think I'd just like to start out by talking about spacewalks by saying that spacewalk is an interesting term because there's not really any walking going on during a spacewalk. What Shane and Tama would have done during this recent spacewalk or EVA was they for 7 hours and 15 minutes, I think, outside of the ISS, they were not walking. They were more like crawling along the space station, and their gloved hands were their way of getting around and actually their primary interface to all of the tools that they would need to use to complete their work. I will share with you, I have props, and I'm so thankful to ILC Dover. This is like my #1 thank you, present from space flight experience and training is this is the glove, my hand mold that was used to create my custom glove for the spacesuit. And, so there's a lot that goes into this, right? It's considering the human in this suit. I don't want to oversimplify, but from the astronaut perspective, I really think with respect to our spacesuits, there's a couple key things. We want to know that the suit will keep us safe, out in all of those extreme conditions that Amy shared with us. We want to know that the suit is going to keep us safe, and we want to be able to perform all the required tasks. So there really is this balance between what's necessary from the life support safety side and the utility side of the suit. And I love this picture. I'll share with you a couple reasons why, but to extend on that kind of balance is, I think Anne McLean, she's one of the astronauts in the office, current astronaut. I heard her say it best one time is that as an astronaut, when you go out to do work in one of these suits, you don't want to ever think about the spacesuit. You want it to be on you and they're protecting you. You want to be able to do all your work, but you're really not wanting to actively engage with thinking about what the suit's doing or how it's doing it. And I think that's the way, we work in pretty much any environment. And as Dan, as you mentioned earlier, it's like going out in your own personal spaceship, but one that we have to be able to move around in comfortably. And in this picture here, I love sharing this a lot of times because it's the picture that my mom always reminds me why she was afraid while I was in space. Because when she looks at it, she's like, all she sees is her daughter like hanging on by one hand, right, on the end of the space station. And in her mind, NASA should always have a 2 hands on the space station rule. And yet I know, I'm hanging out there with one hand, but you can see a tether linking up to the station. There's another safety tether that I think at that point still ran all the way back to the airlock where I would have exited the space station to go out. And so we have kind of 2 hands on the station all the time, but they might not just be ours. But it's pretty cool to think that we can go out and do these kinds of things. All right, so there's a lot that goes into preparing us to go out and do these spacewalks. We spend a lot of time with Amy and Dave's team getting sized properly in the suit, making sure that we have gloves that fit us, doing things in kind of mock-ups of what the spacecraft will be, how we'll get set to go out on the space station mock-ups. The bottom right corner picture is one of like the highlights of spacesuit training is actually to go into a real vacuum chamber and get to move in the suit and see and, actuate all of the, the things that you might work with on the spacesuit in this chamber that's down to vacuum. They even do that really cool, what is it, with the water boiling test, and then so you get to see that, yeah, really in that vacuum, what Amy described happens. And also like the feather and the penny or something, dropping things. It's really very interesting to do that, but also to be in like the real suit that you'll be wearing for real on your space mission. We also have things like virtual reality labs where you can crawl along the outside of the space station. We spend a lot of time getting to know like the systems of the suit. Even though we don't want to think about it while we're out working on that spacewalk, we do want to know how we as the astronaut can interface with the suit, help when things don't go as planned, communicate with our mission control team and the people that are there supporting us to make sure that we stay safe during the spacewalk. I think probably the most visible training that people see of astronauts preparing to do spacewalks is at what we call the neutral buoyancy lab, which is at the Johnson Space Center. It's this ginormous pool. It's like and Dave and Amy, you can correct me. I think it's like 200 feet long, 100 feet wide, 40 feet deep. It's got a mock-up of the space station in it. And we get in there and essentially, they're training versions of the suit, but they're essentially the same suit we'll wear on the space station. And we interface with all the tools. We get a sense of what looking through that helmet, that visor is going to be like, with the space station right in your face, and the kind of the movement, and just situational awareness of the whole kind of activity. And we will spend 6 hours in the pool, in the suit, doing that work. These are a couple pictures. One is on the pool deck. That little young man in the picture with me is my son Roman, who, I don't know, he was probably 6 maybe in that picture. He just graduated from high school. So that's how much time has gone by there. And then bottom right is in the pool, working in the suit, probably the most crystal clear swimming pool you can find anywhere, working to do all of these tasks. And I think I'm hanging on to a box that I would ultimately remove for real on my space flight. And there is no better place for preparation, but I can actually tell you too, this is the most physically challenging work I think I have ever done. Spending 6 hours in that suit, moving against the pressure that Dave described. Your hands are pressurized too, working in these gloves. It prepares you very well for what it's going to feel like for real on the space station. And the suit weighs, what, you guys correct me too here, I think about 300 pounds maybe, and so you can see in the top left, I'm actually on a structure. They're going to lift me up with a crane to put me in the pool. And so while the divers and the people that are in the pool with us will try to get us as neutrally buoyant as possible, you're still working the whole time, not just against the pressure in the suit, but against the drag of the water and gravity wanting to pull your legs down when you might want to have your legs up. And so it's a very, very interesting thing to do. I remember always having to think, okay, the pleasure is the pain. And unless I'm really hurting myself, I'm going to smile, I'm going to get through this, I'm going to figure out how to make this work. And it's amazing how you prepare yourself to do the real spacewalk by going through that, and the calm that you can have with your ground team to help prepare you to do that. Now, this is a little video. It just kind of runs through some of the activities of preparing to do a spacewalk. The crew members that are going to do the spacewalk are actively involved in preparing the suits on orbit. We try them on and make sure they fit first. We go through a whole fit check, and then on the day of, we're working with our crewmates to get ready to go out. It is an extraordinary experience to be in the airlock preparing to do this. Coming out of the airlock hatch, I don't know, another place where I think my mom was probably a little frightened watching, her daughter do this. But again, totally prepared, I think, for doing this through the training that we have. Being able to move in these suits just effortlessly, in comparison to the pool, just effortlessly moving in any direction you want, pulling yourself along with your hands. And then one of the highlights for me on the spacewalk, which was to get strapped in. You can see my feet are attached to this foot restraint on the end of the robotic arm, and moving from, one end of the space station. It was like a 25-minute flight on this robotic arm down into the payload bay of the space shuttle, and never feeling like I was moving. I mean, honestly, it was like the station moved out of my view, Earth moved into my view. Out of, the top right came the space shuttle payload bay, and it was one of the most comfortable times I can remember in space, where the temperature was good, the hum of the fan, in the suit. I remember at one point thinking, okay, Nikki, don't fall asleep out here. Don't be that one. But I can tell you there's enough adrenaline pumping to keep you from falling asleep while you're riding on the end of a robotic arm. And just to say that there's more to doing spacewalk than the astronaut in the suit doing the spacewalk. There's our ground support team. There's Amy and Dave, I think, watching every second of each of these spacewalks, making sure that what they've done is working, how to use the lessons from that to develop these new suits that we're going to use. But for the astronauts too, I remember loving having the experience on my second flight to be the IV, or the person inside, kind of choreographing or bossing around the crew members that were outside doing the spacewalk. And there's a lot to get your head wrapped around when you're doing that. I can tell you, having done a spacewalk, I felt really, really prepared to help my crewmates while they were out there, to communicate the kinds of things they would need to hear as they moved along the space station and were doing the tasks they had to do. I love the picture in the top left of Al Drew crawling along the bottom of the space station. One of the things that you absolutely have to get your mind wrapped around is that there is no up or down. So as you're watching this happen, when you first see it, you're like, holy moly, why isn't Al falling down to that blue glow of Earth that's, 250 miles below him? And yet we all know that Al just feels like he's crawling along the floor. There is no sense of up or down. Pretty amazing that we can do these kinds of things. And I don't know if every astronaut does this, but I can tell you, after my spacewalk, I felt real gratitude to the whole team for making this possible. I still think it's pretty incredible that as human beings we can go out in these little miniature space craft and do this work outside on a space station. I think back to those guys on the moon and look forward to, our friends that are going to have the opportunity to do that in the very near future. And I felt like I needed to say thank you to my spacesuit. So this was the picture of me inside of the mid-deck of the Space Shuttle Discovery saying thank you to my spacesuit. And I just want, I feel like a lot of what I want to do here today is just say thank you, for all of the kinds of things that go on with the creation of these suits, the evolution of them, the ability for us to do this work, but also to the team, these people that we work with in the space flight, space exploration, human space flight side of things are really, really special. And so I wanted to throw out a special thanks today to Dave Graziosi and the ILC Dover team for helping us bring to life art spacesuits for kids all over the world, primarily kids in pediatric cancer centers, and also, some refugee camps now. There's Dave on the left with a group of what we call our artonauts now too, working on these art spacesuits. And this is a couple pictures of, the Space Center Houston team, who have also been very supportive of this activity with the kids and the suits. And we did a really wonderful art exhibit at Space Center Houston several years ago with the suits as a focal point. I can tell you, we tried to bring the whole, community together that had participated, not just in the suits, but in the other artwork that was at this exhibit. In addition to ILC Dover just raising their hands, standing up, thanks to Dave for facilitating that to create these suits out of the artwork. Cannot say enough to the NASA engineering team and to the ISS Program Communications Office for facilitating this work too. This is a slide of one of the suits called Unity in Space. And you'll see this little picture in the bottom left, this young lady that, Dave, I don't know if you remember this young girl or not at MD Anderson, but working with her and hearing stories from these kids about how just the way space exploration inspired them, and they could think about their future outside of this experience that they were going through in the hospital. And I think that's what space exploration honestly does for us all. It inspires us to think about the future. And there's nothing better than the spacesuits, I think, iconically to really create that inspiration. These are a couple of the suits ILC built from the artwork. You can see just painting with the kids, their art coming to life. We've been in all of the countries of the International Space Station program and more now. This suit behind me has artwork from kids in over 50 countries. We're building one now with artwork from kids in every country on the planet. There's our ILC Dover team, Gary in particular, putting together these spacesuits, packing it up. Unity went to the space station. There's Jack Fisher wearing the suit, talking to the kids from Mission Control, and just an incredible experience to see it come together. And then what I love best is watching this suit fly through the station. I can tell you, and this is just me encouraging, but I don't think there's a single astronaut that looks at these suits and wonders, why can't my suit have some of this artwork on it? And I love, in the pictures that Dave showed, that we are embellishing in some way. I think we're bringing some, creativity where we can and where it can fit into the engineering and technical side of it into the new suits. And this is just my little wave to wrap it up and say that spacewalking, the creation, the design, the future of spacesuits is really, it's what lets us kind of explore beyond what we can even imagine right now. And I think when we look back at what we've done, walking on the moon, that Gemini suit, going out that hatch and those guys getting back in, what we've learned from that, what we have to look forward to is really, really extraordinary. And I'm hopeful that more and more people will have the opportunity to put themselves in one of these beautiful creations and explore on the outside of a space station or on the surface of the moon and, one day Mars and beyond. All right, I'll zip it. Thank you.
Nicole, that's amazing. It's so fantastic to see, to hear the real experience of being in your own personal spacesuit out there, but to also, see how much you acknowledge and appreciate all those people who put their time, creativity, and effort into building these extraordinary pieces of technology. And then to be able to add that, that ability to give back and to inspire students through that creativity. And that it leads to a little bit of a question for you, and that idea of creativity and involvement. And so I wanted to ask you, and then it can lead to some discussion with the others of how much involvement do the astronauts, the end user of the product of the spacesuit, how much involvement do you all have in the design, development, building of the spacesuits? Or are you just given a suit and told to, put it on and go for it?
Well, I think there's a mix of that, but what I loved was, and I think it's where I met both Amy and Dave for the first times was, participating as a crew member, as like an evaluator almost of different design iterations that were going on, whether that was with the gloves or the whole suit overall. I love the picture Dave sends me every now and then. Oh, I found this picture of you trying out the Z2 suit, or, there's you climbing in the back at was it Building 7, I guess, like doing these kinds of things and being really actively engaged in that. And then we participate very actively in the development of the spacewalk procedures themselves, which are, very much reliant on how the suit works, what you can do in it, and, having these exchanges with the suit builders and the suit engineers and the designers every step of the way. So I think it's very appropriate, the way that it works even now with the astronaut crew member interaction, with kind of the design evolution. But I don't think you want us there when you're figuring out which joints should you put in a new suit, as far as like the initial design phase of that. But to get in it and figure out whether it really works or not is where I think we're at. And then I wanted to say this before, is that that more and more now, I know, Dave, you and Amy have both been in the suits, right? Have you both been in the neutral buoyancy lab?
I have never had the pleasure. Not sure about you.
Okay. But you've been in a suit, Dave, and I think that's the key, is that to get, actually have the people that are designing and building the suits, that are training us to use them, getting in the suit itself, so they have some understanding of what it means when Nicole says, hey, I can't, I'm having trouble rotating my arm in the pool, because the pool puts burdens on the suit that it doesn't experience necessarily in the microgravity environment in space. And what do I need to do to, resolve that? And knowing that the people that are actively designing, building, and training us to use them have the opportunity to get in that suit too and experience that is really, really hugely helpful. Probably even more than me getting in the suit to say what I think about it.
Well, yeah, I would just add to that in, like Nicole said, that, some examples of when Amy and I were working on the Z2 suit, even early in that development cycle, in this case, Nicole and others were brought in where we had early prototypes, in this case, a lot of 3D printed early prototypes to look at not only fit, but operation of the suit that would help, sort of feed back information to us that would help us make the design better. So I can think of numerous examples, and like she said, I found one recently when we were doing rear entry iSuit, and in this case, it was actually not in our ILC Dover labs, it was at Amy's advanced suit lab at JSC, where they had Nicole come over and get in and do some evaluation, provide feedback, again, good, bad, and different on different aspects, I'm sure, of mobility and other things. So there is a lot of that feedback loop in the design cycle. They may not be sitting there behind a computer developing 3D models of the joints, but providing that operational experience of, what does the suit really need to do, and is it adequate to do certain jobs, is really critical feedback, again, as part of the development of the overall system.
Oh, that's fantastic. Amy, I have a question for you that comes right off of that. The idea of designing the training necessary for the astronauts to be able to use these pieces of technology. Could you talk a little bit about, how many hours the astronauts have to train in a particular suit? Possibly, what does that look like? Is the neutral buoyancy lab, the only place they train? Are there other ways that the astronauts train for these experiences out in these individual spaceships?
Yeah, that's one of my favorite parts, is the testing of the suits and then getting folks ready to go do their spacewalks. And so we have a variety of different test facilities. At NASA, we don't have one big room that's weightless and a vacuum and the right thermal environment and all those things. So we have to kind of piece apart the different aspects of the experience. So Nicole talked about being in the space station airlock training assembly and getting in there and getting to feel her suit in the actual vacuum with actual interfaces of the space station airlock in front of her. So that's one of the different kinds of areas we have. The neutral buoyancy laboratory is best for microgravity spacewalk training. And NASA has another facility called the Argos, or Active Response Gravity Offload System. It's basically a big robot in a way. And so there's a frame, and then there's a system that will offload you so you feel like you're in moon gravity. And that allows you an extended period of time experiencing 1/6 gravity, moon gravity, or 1/3 gravity, Mars gravity, or pretty much any gravity in between. So you can get used to what it's like to manage yourself in this different gravity. Because when you watch the astronauts fall in the lunar missions, part of that was because their suits weren't as mobile as the suits we're trying to develop for future crews. But part of that is that 1/6 gravity is weird. And so it's just hard to get used to and manage. So we can get over some of those humps on the ground by training in Argos. We used to have a plane called the Reduced Gravity Aircraft, or better known as the Vomit Comet. And that's where you actually got real gravity. So you and the suit and what you were doing were all in the actual gravity you were going to experience this in. And so that was kind of our ground truth of what our partial gravity activities and suit performance was going to be. And that's just a few of the different kinds of ways. We have human rated thermal vacuum chambers to get the vacuum and the thermal environment you're going to experience to test the suit. But really it's more to test the suit than the crew members getting trained. So there's different kinds of facilities that we can use for different kinds of activities. But when we are qualifying a suit for use, the crew members are our customers. And so if we don't have that feedback from them through these various different test arenas, then we don't know we're done yet until they say, we're good to go, you're done, good job, let's go fly the thing. So.
No, that's great. And I think, I know that when guests visit Space Center Houston and they take the tram tour, I think the Argos system is there in the building, and guests can actually see that Argos system in action.
So Building 34, Building 9, those are kinds of places when an astronaut sees those places on their schedule for the day, they are smiling. They know they're going to be interacting with real hardware. They know that there's something that they're going to be doing that is close as possible to what we can do down here on Earth to prepare to do it in space, and that brings joy. So those places are incredible, and yeah, it's really cool that that the tours from Space Center Houston can give people a little peek into those worlds. And in the neutral buoyancy lab, that's one where I know people love getting at. There are these big viewing windows that look down into that crystal clear pool, and you can see the astronauts on those platforms, the support structures with the cranes getting ready to lift them in and out of the water. It's really I think it's kind of an eye opener for people to see that kind of thing happening here on Earth to prepare astronauts to live and work in space.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And I have a question for David, and it's really about the future of spacesuits. A lot of us have watched, we've watched The Martian, and we've watched other, movies out there with spacesuits design, and I've seen some other designs of spacesuits that aren't big and bulky, and and are smaller and tighter. So could you talk a little bit about, what is the future like beyond? We're thinking even beyond the current suit that's being built, but are there some really viable technologies out there that make the suit smaller and more mobile?
Right. So it's a really good question, and I was thinking in the evolution slides I could have put something up there again, but I would sort of argue at this point there isn't anything viable in what really folks like to call mechanical counterpressure suit technology. Right, not something new, dates back to the 60s really, but it's trying to make that technology viable. And so a lot of people call it a second skin, right? So your skin across your body is sort of that pressure retaining layer, but it would expand and you would die if you don't constrain it. So what you see in a lot of the movies is basically this form-fitting, almost looks like a spandex type garment layer. And the problem with the technology, again, we have looked at it, others have looked at it over the years, NASA's done their own studies. It's really the technology, I would say, hasn't caught up with us yet. And the real constraints are power is a big one, right? And the fact that in order to make that technology viable, you need active fabrics, right? We look at electronic textiles, and that technology field has really grown leaps and bounds in the last 10 or so years, but not to the point to where it could really be applied reasonably to a mechanical counterpressure suit. So the problem areas are obviously in your armpit, in your elbows, the hand, highly complex thing, your feet as well. But so if you think of having the second skin, it has to match your body and how it moves as you're walking and kneeling and sitting. You need something that can expand and contract with you, maintaining a certain limit of pressure all over your body. And that is something that we've looked at electroactive polymers and shape memory alloys and those type of technologies. And we have yet to see anything really come online that is viable. It either has a lot of force and very little movement, or a lot of movement and very little force. And then coupled with that is the power to drive all that, and then how you would weave that into a garment that literally could actively work. So as you go to move, it is moving with you, right? So now you've got the computer technology that's needed, and even though that's probably not the biggest constraint, it is a very complex problem. And I would just say, we continue to look at that, but the technology really isn't viable yet. Now, if you go back to what we would call sort of classical pneumatic suits, everything that you saw in those slides, I made that comment about the picture on the backside of Meteor Crater because folks see the EMU spacesuit primarily, right? And it looks big and bulky, and it is, but there are specific reasons for that. Partly is its age and when it was developed, even if you look at the early 90s. But that suit, what most people don't realize, is designed to be extremely strong, partly because of the US sort of space program philosophy is if I'm holding on to a multi-million-dollar satellite and it's trying to move away from me, you better not let go of it because it's a multi-million-dollar satellite. So if you're locked in those foot restraints, even though you don't have gravity, you have mass and momentum. And if you're holding on, it tends to want to rip the suit apart. So again, the suit's designed to be very strong. What Amy and I and others are employing today that you don't really see is, again, composite structures, but even uses of metals that have been around for a long time, but it's really how you design and use them in the way of aluminum and titaniums, and these aren't your average versions of those. So if you look at the eye suits that I showed, if you look at the Astro commercial EVA suit that I showed those pictures in, and Z1 and XCMU, all those are really edging up into that more conformal, lighter weight arena. And so that is sort of one of the holy grails of the spacesuits that we are always striving for. So hopefully that sort of answers the question.
Yeah, that's great, David. And so I guess the one thing I hear from that is that there's still a lot of work to do. There's still a lot of innovation that needs to happen, and we need a lot of we need a lot more scientists and engineers and artists working on these big problems to go out there. So that's exciting to hear that there's a lot of opportunity in space exploration. There's a lot of opportunity to really change the future and help those of us on Earth that are going to stay on Earth. But really, it's exciting opportunity to say, you as a young student out there or someone in college could solve this problem and create an extraordinary suit. And that leads to my question for Nicole with that is that I know you do this work, you reach out to people all over the world really, and inspire them with your work and your experience and these suits. And so I'm wondering if you could tell us what's your most powerful experience as an astronaut in a spacesuit, that really inspires all of us to say, hey, this is something that I'd really like to explore. I'd really like to be part of this mission and this endeavor.
Well, I think that that's a difficult question because, I think you could definitely say, wow, one of the most powerful moments is coming out of that airlock and, hanging on to the handrail around the edge of the airlock and the reality check of, holy moly, that's a long way down to that planet down there. And where are all the divers in the bottom of the pool and, all that stuff, like where you really are out there. But I think, it's like, it really is like the people, coming together today, like to have this session. I mean, I'm thinking of I've got like so many memories coming back just through being in building 34, trying the suits on, never having gotten into the neutral buoyancy lab, going over and touring through ILC Dover and meeting the folks there, working with them to make this, this hand of mine that would one day allow me to to go like put my hand up and do, crawl along the station myself. And I think it really comes down to the opportunity to work with really exceptional people that opened up something for me to be able to do a spacewalk, and that might not be the kind of answer you were looking for, but I think it really ties to what you were saying even before that, following on with Dave's comments about, kind of the challenges looking at some of these suits that we see in movies and things, is that there really is an opportunity for, for the future engineers to look at how we take advantage of new materials, what we do to keep humans alive while they're doing spacewalks, exploring new planets. I'm thinking about this time where we are like interstellar and really, really and truly a multi-planetary species, and all of that coming back for the greater good of Earth. I just, I know I could ramble about it all day, but I just love the people that I got to work with associated with all of it. Yeah.
Well, that's great. Thank you, Nicole. And, I do want to thank Amy, David, and Nicole, three very exceptional people that have gotten to work together, and then, that get to come and talk to all of us about this, this fantastic piece of technology, the spacesuit that gives humans the opportunity to be out in space and to work in extraordinary environments. So I want to thank you all for this fascinating conversation. For more information on the topic, we want you to follow Space Center Houston on social media. Check out the Space Center Houston blog. And again, we want to thank the University of Texas Medical Branch for presenting our Thought Leader series. And thank you all for joining us today. Come out and visit Space Center Houston and see some of these extraordinary examples of the stories you heard today.
Everyone in my generation wasn't alive the first time we went to the moon, and we want to do it again, and we want to do it better. The spacesuit in general is like a little mini spacecraft. It has almost every system represented because ultimately it's a life support system. This is going to keep someone alive in a very dangerous, critical environment. We love what we do. We really want to see this system fly and be useful and help a person explore the moon in a more capable manner than they were able to do during Apollo. So it's a great job.